So, our Torah portion starts, or this week our Torah portion is entitled Acharei Mot, after the death. So the Torah portion describes the Yom Kippur service and all that entails. It also goes over the prohibition against eating blood and the laws concerning forbidden sexual relations. So you could say it's all about, in a way, generally speaking, about boundaries in a sense. The Yom Kippur narrative and its service seem to be out of place to me, though. We've been talking, for the last bit about different things that the Yom Kippur just doesn't fit in the pattern. So back in, the last 5 portions in Exodus from Truma all the way through Pekude, those portions and the first 2 portions in Vayikra in Leviticus, Vayikra and Zav, those were about the building of the tabernacle and the offerings that were brought there. Then we move into Shmini, where we see the actual consecration and the startup of the tabernacle. And then we move into Tazria and Metzora, talking about the laws of childbirth and the leper. And now we come into Yom Kippur. Next week, right on the heels of this portion, Yom Kippur, we're going to start looking at laws of holiness. So Yom Kippur seems kind of out of place in the narrative. To me, it doesn't fit, but I'm thinking there may be something more. Why do you suppose in the first opening line of the portion, we hear about the death of Aaron's 2 sons? How does that play into what he's going to teach us? So if we look at Leviticus 16:1, it says, "Now the Lord spake unto Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, when they offered before the Lord and died." So he throwed in the death of Aaron's sons. Well, you might be thinking, what does the death of Nadav and Avihu have to do with Yom Kippur? Typically, we think about Yom Kippur and we associate it with what? Forgiveness, atonement, right? It's the Day of Atonement, but we think of it as forgiveness. So why do you think that the instructions for Yom Kippur are immediately preceded by talk about the death of Aaron's sons? So I've said for a while, sometimes you may have heard, hey, we got to put on our thinking caps. Well, today we're going to have our thinking caps on, but we're also going to have in hand our thinking shovels because we're going to do a little digging. All right, so Leviticus 16:1 again says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, when they offered before the Lord and died." Now, I had always looked at Nadav and Avihu in I guess you'd say, through very critical eyes. A lot of ways, the same way that I viewed Hophni and Pinchas over in the book of Samuel. They were bad. They did something they weren't supposed to, and they died because of it. But, like we have perceptions of people, I think a lot of times we're missing part of the story. We don't see everything, so why would we jump to a conclusion about somebody just based on a couple little verses? Because if you think about it, Nadav and Avihu are only mentioned in really 3 places in all of Scripture. But we've already made up our minds about they're not good, they're bad. At least that's how I looked at it until I started studying this really in depth. So, because we have issues with perception of what their character may be, I think their names may tell us something. So if you've been following the movement for a while, or you know a little bit of Hebrew, the meaning of their names is something special. Names really, they indicate a lot. It tells a lot about a person's character, typically speaking. So we're going to look at the names of Nadav and Avihu. We're going to start with Avihu. It's the easy one, okay? Avihu. What words do you hear there? Ave, which means father. Hu means he. So put them together. You get Avihu. he is my father. So in my mind, that indicates that Avihu was, attesting to the fact that God is my father. Doesn't mean such a bad thing, right? So then we look at Nadav. Nadav, he's a little bit trickier. You have to look a little deeper to get some depth of meaning from his name. His name basically means generous or willing. But we see that word in Exodus 25. A word, at least the root word that Nadav's name comes from. And it's when we're talking about the gathering of the materials for the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. Exodus 25:2. Speak unto the children of Israel that they bring me an offering. And every man that giveth it willingly with his heart, you shall take my offering. Asher yedvino levo, with a willing heart. He who gives with a willing heart. Yedvenu, that word for willing heart, yedvenu, is the same root word as Nadav. So it kind of makes me think, wait a minute, maybe he had a willing heart. Isn't that what God's looking for? That he's looking for a willing heart to build the house that he's going to dwell in amongst us. So not really the perceptions of Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's two sons, that I had always held to. But wait, there's more. Let's look at Exodus 16:1 again. Go back to the first verse of our Torah portion. And the Lord spake unto Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they offered before the Lord and died. Now I know I looked at one version, I think it was the New King James Version, says when they offered strange fire or profane fire before the Lord. Those two words are not in the text. So in the text it is Bekaravatam lifnei Adonai. Bekaravatam. Do you hear a word you may have heard before? We studied it just a few weeks back in the Torah portion of Vayikra, and it bled over into the Zav. It's the word karav. Karav is, it means, it's the Hebrew word that means to draw near or to approach. You can see up here, it's a kuf, a resh, and a lamed. Karav, to draw near or approach. So what we're seeing here, what they were doing, the actions that they were performing, God is my father, and willing heart are trying to draw near to God. Okay? So in my mind, it appears that Nadav and Avihu were trying to draw near. But, that seems like a positive thing, right? We want to draw near with a willing heart. But something happened. It's supposed to be a good thing, no? But their drawing near resulted in their destruction. So let's get our shovel back out, our little thinking shovel, and dig a little bit deeper. What was happening on the day of their demise, the day that they died? Okay, we just had the inauguration of the Mishkan. The tabernacle daily service was just beginning. But this one was going to be a little bit special, more so than what you would think of as the normal, regular daily service later on in years. This one was special. Let's look at Leviticus 9:23. It says, and Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation and came out and blessed the people. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the people. And there came fire out from before the Lord and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all the people saw, they shouted and fell on their face. Okay, so the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle. And all the people, the fire comes out from the Lord, consumes the, offering on the altar. The people shout and fall to their faces. It's really an awe-inspiring event. But what did Nadav and Avihu do? That's when they go run, grab a fire pan and some incense, and they rush to offer their strange fire. Something that God had not commanded them to do. So what do you think motivated them to do such a thing? What was their motivation? What would spark them to go grab a fire pan, coals and incense and rush to the tabernacle to offer. Maybe, perhaps they were caught up in the emotion of the event. You know, they got wound up in the time that was going on. But I think the text will point us to something a little deeper. Let's go back and read in Exodus 24. I believe Nadav and Avihu had seen something before. They had seen something incredible before, and something new was happening, but it was very similar. It was something that really came to their mind. So we go into Exodus 24, verse 1. And he said unto Moses, this is God, come up unto the Lord, thou and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship afar off. And Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come nigh, neither shall the people go up to him. Now, here's something I got to point out. Verse 1, we've already went past verse 1 on the screen, but verse 1 says, come up unto the Lord. This is God speaking to Moses. Come up unto the Lord, you, Moses, Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, and 70 elders. The 70 elders are not named, but did you notice that God called Nadav and Avihu by name? They were called to go up to the mountain. Let's continue on, jump down to verse 9 of Exodus 24. Then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in its clearness. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hand. They also saw God and did eat and drink. The Lord said to Moses, come up unto me into the mount, and be there. And I will give thee tables of stone, and a law, and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. And Moses rose up, and his minister Joshua, and Moses went up into that mount of God. And he said unto the elders, tarry ye here for us, until we come again unto you, and behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man have any matters to do, let him come to them. And Moses went up to the mount, and the cloud covered the mount. And the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. On the seventh day he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud and got him up into the mount, and Moses was on the mount 40 days and 40 nights. So, do you see some similarities in this account where Moses goes up to the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, and the account that was made of the inauguration of the tabernacle? There's some key words and points that they appear in both places. So we'll play this little game of which one of these, are alike. So you guys will show that chart that I did. So I made a chart that's going to compare Exodus 24, what we just read, Moses going up on the mount, and the scene in Leviticus 8:9. Now, there's a little caveat here. You see the heading there that says Leviticus 8 and 9, but there's a couple references in Exodus chapter 40. There's a reason for that. So, first thing we see, similar. The cloud covering the mountain and the cloud covering the tabernacle. The clouds in both instances of the narrative, right? Then we see the glory of the Lord appearing in both instances. We see God appeared unto them in both instances of the stories. We see the tablets on the mountain. Where do we see the tablets? Actually, we don't even see the cloud or the tablets in Exodus 8 and 9. Why would you think that would be? You have to it's not in the text, but step back for a minute and look at the big picture. You're standing at the tabernacle. What do you see? You're going to see the cloud, right? We know that the tabernacle has just been erected, just been stood up. What's in the tabernacle? We go into the holy place, we see the menorah, we see the table of showbread, we see the altar of incense. We go into the Holy of Holies, we see what? The Ark of the Covenant. What's in the Ark of the Covenant? The tablets. So the tablets are in the story, they're just not written out in the text. We see them there. So we see the tablets in both accounts. We see a consuming fire. The whole mountain, the fire, the glory of God was like a consuming fire on the mountain. And in the Exodus 8:9 or Leviticus 8:9 section, we're seeing here that the fire comes out from God and devours the offering on the altar. We see a reference to 7 days. So Moses was on the seventh day. He was on the mountain for 6 days, and on the seventh day, he went up into the cloud, right? The Mishkan takes 7 days to dedicate. So on the seventh day, the dedication was complete. The eighth day, Shmini, is when the incident with Nadav and Avihu happened on the eighth day, when everything was inaugurated. And then we see that there's offerings eaten in Exodus chapter 24 and in Leviticus chapter 8. There are offerings eaten. Both of these offerings are Shelamim offerings. They are peace offerings. They were ones that were shared, okay? So you're seeing basically in the camp at the inauguration of the Mishkan, you're seeing a recreation of the Sinai experience, at least maybe in Nadav and Avihu's mind. They're seeing, oh, this has started again. This is the same thing that was up on the mountain. Does that give you a little reason to see why they got excited, why they got emotional? Could it be that they were seeing that recreation on the mountaintop experience like they've seen before, but remember, they hadn't been able to experience in it its fullness. Remember, they had to wait at a certain place in the mountain, and then Moses went up by himself. They had to tarry at this other place. So they didn't get to fully realize the total experience of going into the cloud and having that encounter with God. But now, the cloud's in the midst of the camp. The glory of the Lord's in the midst of the camp. We see all these similarities, and the way my mind works, I'm thinking Nadav and Avihu are saying, oh wow, it's happening again. It's happening again. It's the eighth day though. So maybe it's our turn. New beginnings. 8 represents, typically speaking, a new beginning. It's the eighth day. Maybe it's our new beginning that we now get to go into the cloud. So they could see that happening again, except, it's in the middle of the camp. So they grabbed their fire pans and they grabbed incense and they rushed into the cloud. Why do you think they decided to bring incense? Now, if we're saying these two accounts are similar, the Exodus 24 mountaintop experience and the inauguration of the Mishkan, if those two experiences were similar, we don't read anything about Moses carrying incense with him to the cloud. But now Nadav and Avihu they're bringing incense. So why might they bring incense? I think that the word for incense might allude a little bit to their motivation. So the word for incense in Hebrew is ketoret. It comes from the root word katar. It's a kuf, a tet, and a resh. And it means incense. It means the smoke of the sacrifice. But it also has this idea of connecting or joining. Does that start driving towards some kind of motivation, a connection or joining? So they go with their fire pans with ketoret, with this connecting or joining. Their intention is to connect with the Holy One inside the cloud. But something went terribly wrong. They're struck down, right? Fire comes out from the Lord and consumes them. What do you think that does to the people that are standing around? What do you think their thoughts were? I can imagine, them saying things like, well, these were two priests. They were the sons of the high priest. They had just finished their inauguration. They had the oil of anointing still upon them. Surely they're holy and righteous men, and they've been consumed before the Lord. How are we ever going to be able to approach God? How are we going to do that? So I think Leviticus 10, we move over to Leviticus 10, and I think God answers their heart's question. When he says, and then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord spoke, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh to me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. So God said that he was going to be sanctified in those that wanted to draw near. He was going to be made or regarded as holy. He had to be approached in a manner that would respect his holiness. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with the word for holiness in Hebrew. What is it? Kadosh, 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 kadosh. And it's the word for holy. But what do we say it means? We got a quick definition that we spout off every time that we talk about holy. We say set apart, and that's it. But what does that mean? What does set apart mean? If we've got this little short word definition, does it have any power for what we're trying to convey? So, that in mind, does that simple definition really give it justice? So, we tend to look at holiness as being set apart from worldly influences or things like that. But let's get our little thinking shovel out and go dig a little bit more. Okay? The word for holy, kadosh, right? We think it means to be set apart. And it does. Don't get me wrong. But I think there's a lot more depth of meaning that goes there. So if we go back to Genesis 38. Genesis 38 is the story of Judah and Tamar. Okay? Judah has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. He takes a wife, Tamar, for his son the scripture tells us, the text says, he was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. That's what the text says. God killed him. So Judah tells Onan, the second born, to go into Tamar and raise up seed for his brother. Onan, you know the story, decides, not going to do it. So God strikes him dead. At this point, Judah says, nope, okay, Tamar, you go back to your father's house. Stay with him until Shelah is old enough to marry. My thoughts, thinking about what's running through Judah's mind. I'm not giving him to her because that black widow's not going to take another one of my boys. That's my thought of what was going through his head. Because when Shelah grew up, he wasn't given to Tamar. And Tamar noticed it. So what did she do? She took matters into her own hands. She disguised herself and she sat by the road. And Judah comes by and he thinks she's a harlot, a prostitute. And there's a reason for that. In the text, it calls her a kadasha. And that word is the word for harlot. The word for holiness is kedusha. They sound very similar, right? Kedusha, kadasha. They actually come from the same root. So how can that be? These are polar opposite words. You don't think of holiness and prostitution in the same thing. But there is a connection. There is a very close connection. And it has to do with boundaries. A kadasha, a harlot, is not bound by marriage. She's not holding or respecting the norms of society or the boundaries of marriage. So she's outside of her boundary. Well, God, in the same way, holiness doesn't have boundaries, but he does have boundaries. Now, when I say that God's not he doesn't have boundaries, I'm talking he is not bound by time and space. He's not limited by time and space, but he does set boundaries. He does say this is a prohibition. Do not do this, do this. And it is to set a boundary about him. But why? Why does he need boundary? He doesn't need protection. It's for us. That boundary is for us so that we can approach and come to him in the right manner. Okay? Looking at that, I kind of look at holiness similarly to grandma's fine china, right? Grandma's china gets put in a cabinet. It's not touched except for special occasions. When those special occasions happen, we take it out. We're very careful, very, very careful with grandma's china. We use it for the event. As soon as it's done, we clean it up very gently. We clean her china. We put it back in the cabinet, right? Her china is essentially holy. It's set apart for a certain time, a certain place. It was never meant to be everyday tableware, right? So things that are holy they're started with boundaries. I'd written this down and I really like the way it's said. Something that is holy, its holiness is attained by making it off limits or having prohibitions. You may have heard the old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. So if that's the case, then perhaps holiness is the opposite of familiarity. We don't get so accustomed to something that we just treat it, anyway. It's not too familiar. If it's going to have any kind of weightiness, importance to it, then it has to be not familiar, not used every day kind of thing. And I think, this holiness begins with prohibitions, limitations on when and where. And I think that's the lesson that Nadav and Avihu missed. They didn't see the importance. They became too familiar. They became wrapped up into their own words, their own feelings of how things should be done. So you might say, in a way, that Nadav and Avihu boldly approached the throne of grace, but it didn't work out for them. But you might be saying, wait a minute. Hebrews chapter 4 tells us that we are to boldly approach the throne of grace, right? Well, yes, we are. But, the way we think, I think we overthink some of these. We take some of these words too simple. And we don't really analyze what the words mean. So this is a Greek word, not a Hebrew word that I'm, accustomed to breaking down. But the Greek word for boldly in this instance has to do more with confidence than it does with brazenness. Our Western mind, thinks of boldness. It lends itself towards the idea of arrogance, not humble confidence. And that's what that portion that says we come boldly before the throne of grace. That's what it's speaking about. It's humble confidence in the fact that Yeshua took our place. If you look in Hebrews chapter 4, if you look at the whole context, it actually points us back to this week's Torah portion. In my mind, I see connections everywhere. It's like a big spider web. So Hebrews 4:14 says, seeing then that we have a great high priest that has passed into the heavens, Yeshua ben Elohim, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we were, yet without sin. Let us therefore, because he's our high priest, he's making intercessions for us. That's why. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. So here we got language that points back to what we've been studying, this Yom Kippur section in Leviticus 16. Because, Yeshua, our great high priest, passed through the heavens, right? Hebrews 4:14, that he's passed through into the heavens, just like the high priest, like Aaron would have passed through the veil to offer the incense on the day of Yom Kippur. And the blood. We can't forget the blood, because without the blood, there's no remission. so we can come confidently to the throne of grace. I'm kind of leery of using that word boldly because in English we see that in more of a proud manner. So I like to avoid things that tend to lead that way. So, and really the word means it's more, has the meaning of confidence. So we can confidently come to the throne of grace. So now I'm going to ask you a trick question. This one's going to be really, some people it may seem a little controversial. But if the tabernacle were in operation today on this earth, do you think we could come boldly to the Holy of Holies? Do you think we could come even to the holy place? But we've been made priest, right? We've been made priest.
Not Levitical.
It's a good point. Not Levitical priest. But so my answer, in this flesh and in this earthly tabernacle, nope, we could not. That was given to Aaron and his sons as a statute. How long? Forever. Has forever stopped? Then I would say that's still in effect. Even though the tabernacle, the temple is not operating right now, God doesn't change. Yet, has it ever occurred to you that nothing ever occurred to God? He's not on plan B. He's still on plan A. He knew what he was doing from the beginning. We didn't. We've got stuff so convoluted because of our Western thinking, even our Hebrew thinking. They didn't get things right either. They expected God to be one way, and they didn't listen to him. They didn't follow his instructions. So even though, here's another question. If the tabernacle was on this earth today functioning as it was planned to begin with, could Yeshua walk into that temple? No. Why not? He's from the tribe of Judah. The only ones that could offer were Aaron's sons. So Yeshua couldn't even do it. But Yeshua does go and offer. Where's his at? He's in the heavenlies, in the heavenly realm, that tabernacle. Because think about it. What was the tabernacle on earth? It was a pattern. It was a shadow of the true. So you think about this. There is a working tabernacle, temple, in the heavenly realm that Yeshua can go and present his blood and can present the incense. But on earth, that's given to the sons of Aaron. It's happened before where somebody tried to, from the tribe of Judah, matter of fact, tried to, get out of their lane, so to speak. We read in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, verse 4. 2 Chronicles 26, 4. And this is speaking of Uzziah. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father Amaziah did. But when he was strong, his heart was lifted up to his destruction. For he transgressed against the Lord his God and went into the temple of the Lord to burn incense upon the altar of incense. And Azariah the priest went in after him, and with him 80 priests of the Lord that were valiant men. What does that mean? 80 valiant men. These were some bad dudes. Okay? These were priests it was like the priestly guard. They weren't just some, meek and mild priest. No, they were not pushovers. And they pushed back against the king. Typically, you don't push back against the king. That's not a normal thing to do. So let's continue. And Azariah, the priest, went in after him, and with him 80 priests of the Lord that were valiant men. And they withstood Uzziah the king and said unto him, It appertaineth not unto thee, Uzziah, to burn incense unto the Lord, but to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and that are consecrated to burn incense. Go out of the sanctuary, for thou hast trespassed. Neither shall it be for thine honor from the Lord God. Then Uzziah was wroth. He got mad. Uzziah was ticked off. Hey, I'm the king. I can pretty much do what I want, right? Uzziah was wroth and had a censer in his hand to burn incense. We heard something about censers before, hadn't we? Somewhere, not of in Avihu, I think took censers in their hands. So he took censer, where did I get to? Censer in his hand to burn incense. And while he was wroth with the priest, the leprosy, the tsarat, even rose up in his forehead before the priest in the house of the Lord from beside the altar of incense. So immediately, the tsarat popped out of his head. It didn't come from somewhere else. It originated from his head, the leadership part of our body. And Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests looked upon him, and behold, he was leprous in his forehead, and they thrust him out from thence. Yea, himself hasted also to go out. That points to me. Oh, he said, oops, I messed up. And he hastened himself to go out because the Lord had smitten him. And Uzziah the king was a leper unto the day of his death, and dwelt in a separate house, being a leper. For he was cut off from the house of the Lord, and Jotham his son was over the king's house, judging the people in the land. So, something just occurred to me. He may have been repentant, but he didn't get healed. He may have recognized, oh, I've messed up. The leprosy has attacked me. I've got to go up. But he still had consequences of approaching the wrong way. He was a leper until the day he died. And he was separated. He was cut off from the house of the Lord. What does that mean? He was cut off from the house of the Lord. He couldn't bring any offerings of any sort. So we see, Uzziah starts off on the right track, but, as time goes on, the pride and arrogance, it started in his heart and it came out. It came out of his head. So he made a presumptuous decision of going and offering the incense. But then there's something interesting. In the year that Uzziah died, Isaiah tells us something. So let's look at Isaiah chapter 6. And I'm sure we're all very familiar with this passage. Isaiah 6:1, in the year that King Uzziah died. Remember, he's been a leper because he tried to offer incense the wrong way. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, twain he covered his feet. Twain, that's the old English kind of word. Not twang, that's what we get down here in the South. So with twain he covered his face, with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, what? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the post of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then I said, woe is me, for I am undone. Because I am a man of unclean lips, and dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphim unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from off the altar. And he laid it on my mouth and said, lo, this has touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged. Do any of those verses have some words that ring a bell? That, stuff we've looked at before? You think about what's in that account of Isaiah's vision and what we've been studying and looking at Yom Kippur. Well, there are some things. We see God's train. That may not be as obvious, but we do see it. And I'll explain that to you here in a minute. We see holy. So we see God's holiness in both accounts. We see the house filled with smoke. and we see iniquity being taken away and sin purged. So both of those ideas are coming together. After Uzziah did what he did and he died, God allowed Isaiah to see into the heavenly throne room. And he saw all this stuff that seems to be associated with Yom Kippur. So, like I said, God's train. What is that? What is God's train? It's not choo-choo. So, what is God's train? Now, my immediate thought when I think of train, I think of a bride with a long flowing gown, and that tail that goes out from the dress is the train. But it's also the same word that's used for robe, or specifically, there's a specific robe. It's the robe of the high priest, the one that has the pomegranates and the bells on it. That is the only time that that word is used anywhere else, is in reference to the train, the robe, the hem of the robe of the high priest. So there's some more to that, but we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. So what I want to do now is transition from Isaiah's vision of the temple back to the tabernacle, from the true back to the pattern. Okay? So let's imagine that we're standing in the courtyard of the tabernacle. We see a tent. We see this cloud that's descended on the tent, wherein we see the glory of the Lord, right? We've seen this cloud before atop Mount Sinai, where we heard the voice. We heard the voice of God coming from the mountain, and it frightened us, but it also left us with a sense of awe, how great our God is. Now it's in the middle of the camp. This cloud that spoke, that we heard the voice of God from, is now in the middle of the camp. And he said it's sitting on top of the Ark of the Covenant, in that place that God said he was going to commune with us from. So let's get out our little thinking shovel again and dig a little deeper. The Hebrew word for cloud, in this case, is anan. It's an ayin anun nun sofit, and it means cloud or cloud mass. Just simple, it's a cloud. But if you haven't guessed, I like Hebrew. I like studying Hebrew words. I kind of tend to blame Brad Scott. Blame is not the right word, but when I first heard his teaching Words Mean Things years ago, it really set me out on a journey of really trying to find out what these words mean. Our English words are so bland. It's like eating a bowl of mashed potatoes without any salt or pepper or butter. I mean, But Hebrew, it's like getting, everything seasoning on it. Everything bagel seasoning, it's good. There's so much flavor. There's so much depth to the Hebrew words. So the Hebrew word, like I said, for cloud is anan. And it is aleph, or not aleph, I'm sorry, not aleph. Ayin, nun, nun sofit. Now, originally, when Hebrew was first written down, it didn't have the form that it has today. Anan was actually, or the Hebrew letters were more like pictographs, what we think of as ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. But each letter has its own specific meaning, and then when you put those words together, they paint a picture of what the entire word is supposed to mean. Now, let's keep in mind the middle letter is the heart of the word. And the heart of the word gets to the essence of what the action is all about. So let's break this one down and do a little word picture thing here with this one. Anan, the ayin, looks like an eye. And it represents knowledge or knowing. You know something because you see it. I know Brandon because I know what he looks like. I've seen him before. I know, Scott because I've seen him before. Okay, so that's the ayin. It means to know. The nun, the nun is the symbol for a sprouting seed. And it means the continuation of life or the perpetuation of life. It also means a son or an heir because the father's name is perpetuated through his heirs, his sons, right? Sons and daughters. We don't want to leave anybody out. And then the Nun Sofit. Nun Sofit, it's still a Nun, but it's at the end of the word. It changes form, and a Nun Sofit represents the ultimate son or the ultimate heir. So let's put those together and see what we can find. The Ayin, Nun, and Nun Sofit. Remember, the heart of the word is the middle Nun. So we're going to go out, out, in when we're looking at what those words mean to paint a picture. So to know, to intimately know the ultimate heir leads to the perpetuation of life. That's what a cloud's about. It's about connection. It's about life. We say, after we do the blessing over the wine, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen, and then we say l'chaim, right? What does that mean? It means to life. To life, it's about life. It's not lemut. If we were to say lemut, that would be dead, to death. We're going l'chaim, to life. So, I want to look a little bit about the cloud, because the cloud's really cool. The cloud is about knowing the ultimate son to perpetuate life. Now, if we look at nature, we know that like kind produces like kind, right? In Genesis, the herb sprang up, it had seed in itself, and it reproduced after its own kind. And then the animals, they reproduced after their own kind. So now we have a cloud. And if we want to connect, we want to have that intimate relationship to produce life with the cloud, we got to have a cloud, right? Because like kind produces like kind. So we need a cloud. So where do we get that cloud? It's a man-made cloud. God's made his cloud. We need a man-made cloud at his instructions. So Leviticus 16:12. Speaking of Aaron, and he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense beaten small, and bring it within the veil. And he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat. That is upon the testimony that he die not. So Aaron takes coals from the altar, and he takes the incense, and he goes in and places it before the Ark of the Covenant, and he makes that cloud. That's a cloud of man's making, right? He made the cloud by putting the incense on the fire. But God instructed him how to do it. So it's not like it's of his own invention. God told him exactly how to make this cloud. Now, he puts the incense on the fire, and that cloud rises up and covers the mercy seat. Just like Aaron performing, when the cloud of incense forms, what does it do? Rises, right? It rises, smoke rises, and it covers the mercy seat. What's on the top of the mercy seat? What's centered between the cherubim? The cloud, God's cloud. His cloud is sitting between the cherubim. Our cloud rises up to meet his cloud. This cloud of incense that Aaron has formed rises up and the clouds merge. They mingle. They have an intimate encounter, right? A connection. So just like Aaron performing the incense offering, Yeshua facilitates our connection with the Father because he acts like our high priest in the heavenlies. Okay, so we read in 1 John chapter 2, my little children, these things write I unto you, that ye sin not. And if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Yeshua the Messiah, the righteous. And he is the propitiation for our sins, and not ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world. So Yeshua is our priest, our high priest, and our advocate. Now, our Western minds typically look at advocate in a legal manner, right? We think of it as someone who's going to plead my defense, basically a lawyer. But there's a little bit more to it. In the Greek, the word that is translated there as advocate is parakletos. Now, some of you may be very familiar with the word paraclete. It's spoken of usually in reference to the Holy Spirit. In John 14, Yeshua said to his disciples, and I will pray the Father, and he will give you another comforter, another paraclete. That's the word that's used. I'll give you another comforter, paraclete, that he may abide with you forever. So interestingly, I found this week, and I was just like, wow, this is crazy great. In the Septuagint, the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, happened long before Yeshua's time. That word, parakletos, is also translated in a section of the Torah that we miss because we always read in English. We don't make these connections, typically. Takes a lot of digging. But that section that paraclete is used is in Genesis when Joseph is talking with his brothers before he's revealed himself, and he's speaking through an interpreter. That word for interpreter is parakletos. So he's an interpreter. The parakletos is an interpreter. It's one that the definition says that it's a person that goes into a meeting with a person for the purpose of conversation, consultation, or supplication. So really, Bill was talking a couple weeks ago in his Roman study. He hit upon that the Spirit, how's it worded? I have to think here for a second. The Spirit makes intercession for us with groanings that cannot be uttered. So the Spirit even can take our groanings, our utterings, interpret them, and present them to the Father. That's really cool. I mean, he can interpret even the grunts and groans of our heart. When we don't have the words to say, he can interpret them and present them to the Father. Here's something cooler, especially when we start looking at a cloud. A cloud forms when water vapor condenses into very tiny particles and it remains suspended in the air. So the cooler temperatures in the cloud cause a difference in density, and that affects how sound travels through the cloud. So let's say you're hiking in the woods and a dense fog sets in place. The sounds of the forest are amplified. You can hear a whisper that's yards away, like it's, right here. Because of the noises are amplified through the fog, a cloud, due to its density, is a better medium for which sound waves can propagate. So, in relation to the cloud that we're looking at, when our clouds commingle, when our cloud merges with his cloud, think about this. The Spirit takes our whispers and groanings, takes them to the Father, amplifies them in the ears of the Father, and he hears them. And likewise, the Father also replies, and it's amplified. Now, Brandon may know this. Big auditoriums, big office spaces, architecturally, there's a device, a construct, that's known as a sound cloud. It's kind of like a shell almost in the ceiling. And it is there to help redirect the sound. So it amplifies the sound that it's supposed to, but did you know that a sound cloud, an architectural sound cloud, actually helps minimize background noise? So God's sound cloud, his cloud, is going to amplify his voice to us, but it's going to block out a lot of the background noise. I thought it was really cool that you had an architectural thing that relates to what we're talking about. But then, so Yeshua is going to carry our incense before the Father, and the Spirit is going to interpret it. His Spirit, So, what is that? What is that incense? David tells us in Psalm 141 what the incense is. He says, I cry unto thee, I make haste unto me, give ear unto my voice when I cry unto thee. Let my prayer be set forth before thee as incense. Our prayers are that incense. And the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Does that mean we can only pray at Yom Kippur? No, that would be silly, right? Think about, when's incense offered? It is offered on Yom Kippur, but you've got morning and night, day and night, right? Day and night, our incense arises. But during this time, it's extra special because the clouds have really merged. Now, before I forget to mention, I said something earlier about the train in the temple, right? Being the high priest robe, where the bell and the pomegranates are at. There's some family words. So family words in Hebrew are ones that are related to one word, that they share similarities. They typically share a common root. Two words jumped out at me that were family words to this word that's used for robe or train. It's the words ask and request. Our asks and our requests filled the temple when it was filled with smoke. When it was filled with a cloud of incense from our prayers, those asks and requests were always right before God. They were attached to God. It was his train, right? So our request formed his train, so to speak. So let's talk about where these two clouds come together, where they merged, right? Because that's the important part. We want our cloud to merge with his cloud. We want that connection. We want to be one with him. So where did it happen? So God's cloud centered over the Ark of the Covenant, right? Over the top of the what? Mercy seat. Anybody know what the word in Hebrew for mercy seat is? It's not like two words. It's one word, and it doesn't. One of the common words for mercy is rahama, and it's not that one. The word for the mercy seat in this case is kaporet. 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 It means covering. It comes from the Hebrew word kafar, from the root kafar. It's a kaf, a pei, and a resh. It means to cover or protect. Okay, we've had some instances of it used before. In speaking of the ark, the kaporet is the covering, the lid on the Ark of the Covenant, that which covers the tablets. Okay, we've seen it in Genesis 6. We've seen this root word. Noah was told to pitch, to kafar, within and without with kafer. So pitch within and without with pitch. Tar, some kind of substance that would basically waterproof the ark. But it was a kafar, a covering. It's about covering over. So when we think about, even in Yom Kippur, think about Yom Kippur. What is it? Kippur, kafar. You hear the connection there? Kippur, Yom Kippur means day of coverings. The day of coverings. When we think of atonement, though, we typically think of forgiveness. Okay, we're forgiven of our sins, right? We're atoned for. It's not exactly that. Let's get our shovel out again. Go back to doing a little bit more digging. Let's look at Leviticus 16:33. It says, and you shall make an atonement for the holy sanctuary, and he shall make an atonement for the tabernacle of the congregation, and for the altar. He shall make an atonement for the priest and for all the people of the congregation. Now, if we simply accept that kafar, atonement, means forgiveness, I got a question. Why would the sanctuary the tabernacle, and the altar need forgiveness. I can get that the priest and the people of the congregation need forgiveness, but why these inanimate objects? It doesn't make any sense. If we just say, oh, it's forgiveness. Atonement means you're just forgiven. The altar didn't do anything that it needs forgiven for. The sanctuary didn't do anything that it needed forgiving for. So what does that mean? Like I said, we're going to dig a little bit deeper. The cloud on Sinai did what? It encompassed the mountain. The cloud of incense, our incense that rose up, it did what? It covered the mercy seat. The mercy seat itself covers the contents of the ark. So we see a whole lot of covering going on. So what exactly does that mean? If the root kafar means to cover, there's an additional meaning though. And I say additional, I don't mean, as in 1 + 1. I mean, this just gives it, it's like an exponent. It makes it bigger, bolder, brighter. So kafar can also mean to engulf or envelop. So the cloud enveloped the mountain, completely covered it, right? The incense cloud enveloped the mercy seat. And what results from that merging? Our cloud and his cloud, when they merge, what do you think happens? I say his cloud because it's greater than our cloud. Is going to engulf us. It's going to envelop us. It's going to protect us. And the result of that is purification. We can only get there when we've been kafared. While the merging of the clouds in the earthly tabernacle would cleanse the flesh, the merging of the clouds in the heavenly realm, facilitated by Yeshua and his work, cleanses the conscious or the inner man. Okay? I know that Bill mentioned, he's mentioned it a couple times that I remember because it really clicked with me. And I want to say he mentioned it during Passover. There are Bible scholars that teach that the word Passover, really a better word for it would be cover over. Because the idea, it's not about skipping over as much as it is about covering and surrounding. So the idea is that God enveloped his people while they were in Egypt, and he kept the destroyer out. And that lines up seamlessly with what we've talked about today with Yom Kippur. Yeshua pictured the same idea. We just don't think it necessarily in that terms. But when he said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how oft would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings." How many of you ever seen a hen gather her chicks under her wings? She's protecting them. They are mean. Do not try to get the babies. Don't ask me how I know. But when that hen takes and covers her wings over her chicks, you know what? You don't see chicks. You see little feet, but that's it. You don't see the chick. They get completely engulfed by her wings and her protection, and she will fight to the death to protect her babies. Do you not think that our Father does the same thing when he engulfs us? When those clouds merge, can you imagine the protection that we've got? How much he loves us to protect us in that way. Now, I need to point out that, atonement or kafar, it's not about dismissing sin. Don't think that covering is just a cover over and it gets us a free pass. So here really is where the word cover in English, and especially our modern colloquialisms using the word cover, comes into play that will kind of explain a little bit of what atonement means. So if I take a group of my friends out to dinner, not going to happen. If I take them out to dinner, though, and I tell the waiter, I'm going to cover for them, what does that mean? I'm going to pay the bill. I'm going to take responsibility for the bill. Does that mean a bill doesn't occur? because I'm taking responsibility? Does Scott's meal, because I said I was going to cover for it, Scott's meal don't cost nothing now, right? It don't cost him nothing. I wouldn't get too excited. So it doesn't cost him nothing, but it's going to cost me something, right? So I'm taking responsibility for his bill. Think about atonement, that Yeshua says, I got you covered. I'm responsible for his bill. I can tell you right now that the sin that engulfed me, that bill, when it comes, I'm not able to pay it. But guess what? He is. He's got me covered. So now the question arises, what do we do to avoid the mistakes of Nadav and Avihu? You know, first thing, most important, which if you don't know and you're knower for 100% knowing, you need to know it. That Yeshua's got you covered. He's got you kafared. Okay? That's number one. But some other stuff that Nadav and Avihu did, we need to learn from their example to not do, right? We don't approach him presumptuously. We don't come to him with wound up emotions and keep our ego in check. We're even commanded to keep ourselves unspotted from the world, right? The priests that come in to offer, we're priests. We're not the high priest that's going to offer the incense cloud before the ark, but we get to come in and offer at the altar of incense in the heavenly realm. When we offer, we're supposed to be in clean linen, right? Did you know that linen represents humility? So we're to come in a humble manner. We're also to be clean. We're unspotted. And we'll learn a lot more about that. There's, next week, Kedoshim, there's going to be a lot of that talk. There's a lot of stuff, even in the latter portions of this, in the latter sections of this Torah portion that talk about clean and unclean, Tuma and Tahor, Tamei and Tahor. You don't, we're not going. That's beyond the scope of what I wanted to talk about here. But we want our clouds to merge, so we want to do things not like Nadav and Avihu did that got them killed. We want to do things that will allow us to approach him in the right manner. Like I said, first make sure we're kafared, we're covered by Yeshua, that we don't act presumptuously and bring and approach the creator of the universe in a way that he's not commanded. Keep our emotions and our egos in check and maintain that level of holiness that's required to draw near to him. And then we be vigilant in our prayer life, because our prayers are that incense that arises, right? And prayers are not just asking for stuff. Sometimes our prayers are praises. Sometimes our prayers are just acknowledging him for the great God that he is. It's not always, gimme, my name's Jimmy. It's not, God's not a cosmic vending machine where you put a prayer in and out pops whatever I ordered. It doesn't work that way. That's not what he wants from us. He wants that relationship. He wants our clouds to merge. So allow our requests and our petitions and our supplications to arise like incense. So I'm going to close, Brandon. So I'm going to close by asking the praise team to come back up. And I want to do again. Now, I will say that all the songs that we did during the praise and worship set, I only had one request. And that was, we're going to do that one again. But all of the other ones played into this teaching. The holiness. I mean, there's just so much that connected. So I know that it was the Father. But I'm going to ask the praise team to come back up here and do Worthy of It All again. And we all, this time, now that we know a little bit about these merging clouds, I want us to really sing with the emphasis that it's a prayer. It's our prayer. It's our heart's prayer that our incense arises before him and our clouds merge.